Imagine your grandfather spent 40 years saving, not in a bank account, not in stocks, in gold coins, physical wealth buried under the floorboards or locked in a strongbox, the kind of savings that couldn't be inflated away, devalued overnight, or wiped out by a bank run, savings that were his permanently. Then one morning in 1933, the President of the United States signed a piece of paper, and overnight, those savings became a federal crime. This is the financial historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. On April 5, 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. Its formal title was Forbidding the Hoarding of Gold Coin, Gold Bullion, and Gold Certificates within the continental United States. It required every American citizen to hand over their gold to the Federal Reserve by May 1, 1933. Less than 4 weeks away. The payment, $20.67 per troy ounce. Non-negotiable, no appeal. And if you refused, a fine of up to $10,000, the equivalent of $243,000 in today's money, 10 years in federal prison, or both. The United States government had just made saving in gold a criminal offense, and most Americans handed it over without resistance. To understand how this happened, you need to go back to October 28, 1929, Black Monday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 13% of its value in a single day. The next day, it dropped another 12%. In a matter of weeks, it had lost half its value. Banks began collapsing. Unemployment would eventually hit 25%. And Americans, terrified, did the rational thing. They started hoarding gold, the one form of wealth that had survived every financial catastrophe in history. By early 1933, the runs were catastrophic. People flooded into banks not to deposit money, but to convert paper dollars into gold coins and take them home. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 required the Fed to hold gold equal to 40% of all Federal Reserve notes it issued. Every ounce of gold pulled out of the banking system tightened that constraint. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the most powerful in the system, was running out of gold to honor its own obligations. In March 1933, it could no longer convert currency to gold on demand. The system was days from collapse. Roosevelt took office on March 4, 1933. His third day in power, he declared a national banking holiday. Banks across the country closed for 4 days. It bought time, but it wasn't enough. The gold drain had to stop permanently, and there was only one way to do that: remove the gold from private hands entirely. But here's the part that gets buried in history textbooks. The legal authority Roosevelt used to seize American gold didn't come from the Constitution. It came from the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, a wartime statute originally designed to confiscate German property during World War I. Roosevelt's lawyers quietly amended it through the Emergency Banking Relief Act of March 9, 1933, expanding the president's emergency powers to include peacetime financial crises. Congress passed the act allegedly without fully reading it, with little debate, in a single day. And that amended wartime law became the foundation for Executive Order 6102. Americans weren't enemies of the state, but their gold was treated as enemy property, and the government seized it accordingly. The order was sweeping. All gold coins, all gold bullion, all gold certificates, delivered to the nearest Federal Reserve Bank or member bank by May 1, 1933. 3 days after receiving any new gold, you had to surrender it. There were narrow exceptions. Up to $100 in gold coins per person, roughly 5 troy ounces, could be kept. Jewelers, dentists, and artists could retain gold for professional use, and rare collectible coins of recognized numismatic value were exempt. But that was it. Everything else had to go. The savings your family had accumulated over generations, gone, replaced by paper. And then Roosevelt did something that revealed the true purpose of the order. On January 30, 1934, 9 months after forcing Americans to hand over their gold at $20.67 per ounce, he signed the Gold Reserve Act and immediately revalued gold to $35 per ounce. Overnight, the dollar had been devalued by 41%. The government had bought gold at $20.67, and immediately declared it worth $35. The profit on that transaction, roughly $2.8 billion at the time, flowed directly into the newly created Exchange Stabilization Fund under Treasury control. A slush fund for manipulating the dollar's value, built entirely from the difference between what citizens were paid and what the gold was actually worth. This wasn't emergency policy, it was a transfer of wealth. From private savers to the federal government, the mechanics were deliberate. The Federal Reserve needed to expand the money supply to fight deflation and stimulate the economy. But it was legally constrained by the 40% gold backing requirement. Every dollar it created needed gold behind it. By confiscating private gold and concentrating it in the Treasury, then revaluing it higher, the government dramatically expanded the gold base supporting Federal Reserve notes. More gold at higher prices meant the Fed could legally create far more dollars. The money supply M1 grew at an average rate of 10% per year between 1933 and 1937. The GNP grew at over 8% annually during the same period. The confiscation worked as monetary policy, but the people who funded it never voted for it. They never consented to it, and they were never fully compensated. The enforcement was targeted but real. Frederick Barber Campbell, a New York attorney, had deposited over 5,000 troy ounces of gold at Chase National Bank. When he tried to withdraw it, the bank refused. A federal prosecutor indicted Campbell the very next day, September 27, 1933. His prosecution ultimately failed on a technicality. Judge John M. Woolsey ruled the original order was signed by the president rather than the Secretary of the Treasury as required. Roosevelt immediately corrected this with Executive Orders 6,260 and 6,261, signed by Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, Jr. Campbell's gold was confiscated anyway. Other prosecutions followed. Gus Farber, a diamond and jewelry merchant, was arrested with his father and 12 others for illegally selling $20 gold coins. The Barabon family was arrested for operating a gold scrap business under a false license. A Swiss banking company, Übersee Finance Corporation, had $1.25 million in gold coins held in the United States. Confiscated. Foreign gold was not exempt. In total, more than 2,600 metric tons of gold were seized from American citizens and institutions. At today's market price above $4,600 per ounce, that gold would be worth over $385 billion. The American citizens who surrendered it were paid the equivalent of $502 per ounce in today's money. The government immediately revalued it to what would be $850 per ounce in today's terms. The gap between those two numbers represents one of the largest single wealth transfers from private citizens to government in American peacetime history. Then came the coin that became a ghost, the 1933 St. Gaudens Double Eagle. A $20 gold coin considered by many to be the most beautiful ever struck by the United States Mint. Nearly 500,000 were produced in 1933. Executive Order the 6102 halted all gold coin production. Every 1933 Double Eagle was ordered destroyed, but approximately 20 coins were stolen from the mint before they could be melted. The Secret Service spent decades hunting them. One coin was legalized after being transferred to a foreign head of state. In 2002, that single coin sold at auction for $7.59 million. In 2021, another example sold for $18.9 million, making it the most valuable coin ever sold at auction. The 1933 Double Eagle became priceless precisely because the government tried to erase it entirely. Americans couldn't legally own gold for the next 41 years. Not coins, not bars, not bullion. Gold jewelry and collectible numismatic coins remained legal, but investment gold was prohibited. The prohibition lasted from May 1, 1933 through December 31, 1974, when President Gerald Ford signed Executive Order 11,825, finally restoring Americans' right to own gold. A right that had existed since the founding of the Republic was suspended for 4 decades based on a wartime statute designed to target foreign enemies. The Supreme Court upheld the seizures as constitutional. The justices ruled in a narrow decision that Congress had broad authority over monetary policy and that the government's emergency powers justified the action. Critics called it completely immoral. a flagrant violation of promises made to purchasers of Liberty bonds during World War I, promises that explicitly guaranteed repayment in gold. The government simply declared those promises void, and the courts agreed. Here's the paradox that makes this story permanent. Roosevelt's gold confiscation worked. The money supply expanded. Deflation reversed. The economy began recovering. Between 1933 and 1937, GDP grew at some of the fastest rates in American history. The monetary stimulus created by concentrating gold in government hands and then expanding the paper dollar supply against it helped pull the country back from the edge of economic collapse. The policy achieved its intended goal, but the method revealed something that had never been so openly demonstrated before. Property rights in America are conditional. The Constitution prohibits the government from taking private property without just compensation. But in 1933, the government decided what compensation was just. It set the price, then immediately revalued the asset higher after taking it. It used a wartime enemy law against its own citizens, and it made saving in the most historically reliable store of value a federal crime punishable by a decade in prison. The lesson isn't that governments are villains. The lesson is that in moments of genuine crisis, governments will do whatever they believe necessary to preserve the system. Not your savings, not your property rights, the system. And if preserving the system requires reclassifying your life savings as contraband, they will do it. They have done it, with the full backing of the judiciary and the full weight of law enforcement. 41 years after making gold ownership a crime, America restored the right. Gold today trades freely. Americans can own unlimited amounts of it. The executive order has been repealed. The legal framework that enabled it has been constrained. In 1977, Congress stripped the president's authority to regulate gold transactions during peacetime emergencies outside of war. But the precedent was never erased. Emergency powers are still real. The Trading with the Enemy Act still exists. The infrastructure for declaring a national emergency, expanding presidential authority, and reclassifying financial instruments is still in place. What happened in 1933 wasn't an aberration. It was a demonstration, a proof of concept that a government, even a democratic one, can criminalize saving when the system demands it. The gold in your grandfather's strongbox wasn't taken by thieves or foreign invaders. It was taken by executive order, by a president his supporters called a savior. In the middle of the greatest economic crisis in American history, and the people who took it called it a rescue. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.